shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Prime Minister, how many service stations in Australia are currently out of fuel?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I might do it state by state, territory by territory. New South Wales, there are 187 with no diesel and 32 without any stock at all. That's down 19 on yesterday. That's out of a total of 2,417 service stations in New South Wales. Queensland figures remain 55 with no diesel and 35 with no regular unleaded. In Victoria, 134 with a lack of one or more grades. That's down 28 on the last report. South Australia, 49 out of 700. Western Australia remains 6 with a total stock out and 4 with no diesel out of 771 service stations. Tasmania, it remains, my advice, 1 with no diesel and 6 with no unleaded. Northern Territory, the advice remains the same, that there are no shortages as a result of fuel shortage. As I said yesterday, the Northern Territory is in the grip of a natural disaster, and of course there are impacts on service stations with access and roads. In the ACT there is currently 1 service station with no diesel, but my advice is that the service stations with no diesel in the ACT are normally having that rectified in a matter of hours.
Call to the Honourable Member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. With the ongoing war in the Middle East impacting supply chains and fuel security around the world, how is the Albanese Labor government taking action to support Australia's fuel security and supply?
Call to the Honourable the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question and for the leading role that she's playing in policy development for the government going forward as well. What we are dealing with, of course, is global in nature and global in scale, as we heard from the President of the European Commission just yesterday. The war in the Middle East is seriously impacting supply chains and pushing up the cost of fuel right around the world. Here at home, those higher prices are putting Australians under pressure. We recognise that, and that's why we're taking action, setting up the Fuel Supply Task Force, releasing 20% of our national fuel reserves, changing petrol and diesel standards to get more fuel flowing. We've backed our oil refineries to keep making fuel on shore. We've made sure that all of the fuel that we make in Australia is used in Australia. We've empowered the ACCC to crack down on price gouging, and just today have introduced even stronger legislation. We've changed the Fair Work Act so truckies are paid fairly when prices spike. And through the National Cabinet, we're delivering a national response so that the states and territories can distribute fuel to where it's needed most, and so the Commonwealth can focus on supply. Working with our trading partners in Asia, we're working to get more fuel to Australia, which is part of our reciprocal relationships. And we're backing industry to deliver a future made in Australia as well, with more energy and manufacturing sovereignty, preparing us for the future. When the war began, we were better prepared for a shock like this. We had the highest reserves in 15 years, and will continue to act in the national interest, because our priority is delivering for all Australians, whether it be on fuel supply and security, whether it be on the cost of living, or whether it be on securing Australian industry and a stronger economy. We'll continue to work each and every day to continue to engage constructively with states and territories, but also with industry, including peak organisations, to make sure that we come through what is a very difficult period right around the world.
Call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. This morning the Minister said, quote, "We have as much fuel in Australia today as we had the day that Iran was bombed," end quote. How many service stations have to be out of fuel before the Minister will use his powers to require mandated reporting of disruption and the immediate domestic redistribution of stock to where it is needed?
Give the call to the Honourable the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I did make that comment because it's accurate. And that is the position the government has been communicating consistently to the Australian people, because that's the responsible thing to do, is to provide the facts to the Australian people, that the ships continue to arrive and that the refineries continue to work full pelt for Australians. As we have said from the very beginning, that does not mean there aren't real shortages in rural Australia in particular, and that the supply chain has struggled when demand doubled. And that has always been the case. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked me why I won't use more information-gathering powers. It does strike me that to use those powers we would need to use the legislation that the Treasurer put through the Parliament that the member for Wannon and everyone else over there opposed, Mr Speaker. It reminds me of demanding that the House return to pass hate legislation and then voting against it, and then voting against other legislation demanding we use it, Mr Speaker.
Has the minister concluded his answer? Yes. Order. The manager will resume his seat. Order. When the House comes to order, the member for Maranoa is interjecting too many times, so I'll be keeping an eye on him. The member for Robertson has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese government acting to get more fuel flowing to where it's needed, and why is now a time for our representatives to act within the national interest?
The call. Order. The member was heard in silence. The minister has the call.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. I think it's his first question since returning from paternity leave, Mr Speaker. So welcome back and congratulations, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to update the honourable member and the House. And I'll update the House primarily firstly on two things. As the House knows, we released 20% of our minimum stock obligation on the condition that it flows to rural and regional Australia. And we have struck agreements with each company that's impacted, and we have been in discussions with those companies and required them to provide real and quantifiable undertakings that it flow to regional Australia. I'm pleased to inform the House that overnight 2 more agreements were struck, and now 757 million litres is flowing to regional Australia, Mr Speaker, as a result of the release of the minimum stock obligation, Mr Speaker, with real obligations to supply regional states and territories across the country. That's what real action looks like. I'm also happy to inform the House, the Prime Minister's informed the House of his interactions, of the Foreign Minister's interactions, with my interactions with our foreign counterparts to ensure ongoing supply. And we know that because we only have 2 refineries operating in Australia, that we do rely on imports when it comes to liquid fuels. And that is the case because we did see the de-industrialisation of refining over previous years. I previously have informed the House that we were aware, out of the 81 expected ship arrivals over April, that we're aware of 6 cancellations. Mr Speaker, I do have an important update. I can tell the House that in this... I obviously think this is very funny, Mr Speaker, but the Liberals and Nationals appear uninterested in the fact that all those 6 cancellations have now been filled with new alternative orders, Mr Speaker. All of them have now been replaced with alternative spot market orders from different locations, Mr Speaker. I'm also pleased to tell the House that industry has informed me this morning, in addition to replacing those 6 cancelled boats, they have been able to secure at least 3 more cargo deliveries for April and May for Australia, over and above the normal contracted deliveries, to ensure that we are dealing with this demand, Mr Speaker. This is good progress. Now, what these actions have in common is practical action, and practical action by government and industry working together. None of them suggested by the opposition, who haven't made a constructive suggestion all through. The only contribution of the Leader of the Opposition has been to mislead about exports. The only contribution of the member for Lindsay has been to mislead the House about a statement by the Premier of New South Wales yesterday. And the only contribution of the member for Wannon is to insult Pacific leaders, Mr Speaker.
Order. The minister will pause. The manager of opposition business on a point of order. Oh, the leader of the...
Sure.
Member Canning. Sorry.
There was nothing in the question about the opposition or risks or alternative approaches, so I just ask that you bring the minister back to the question, unless he's done, which it sounds like he's done. Are you done? You done?
Resume your seat. The order. The Minister for Social Services will cease interjecting. Order. The Leader of the Nationals in the House of Representatives will also cease interjecting. The Leader of the House.
Thanks, Speaker. To the point of order, the final part of the question went specifically to representatives needing to act in the national interest, which is precisely the points regarding the opposition that the minister is now making.
Yeah, the minister is going to be asked about why is it required in the national interest. He's going to explain to the House why that is. That is almost an abuse of the point of order to the member for Canning. So, if this continues, I'll start what I did last week. If this continues of people jumping up because you don't like what's being said and it's not part of the standing orders, I won't take the point of order. So if this continues, I'm just giving fair warning to the House, like I did last time. If there's just frivolous points of order, they won't be taken. I like to be crystal clear with everyone how things roll here, and that will be the decision. The Minister has 12 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The only contribution of the member for Wannon has been to insult Pacific leaders by saying I shall tell them I'm too important to meet with them, and the only contribution of the member for Canning has been to mislead about net zero. Serious times call for serious people. These are not serious people, Mr Speaker.
Before I call the member for Bradfield, I have a number of guests I would like to welcome to the House of Representatives today. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Her Worship Ms Vare Calais Balthazar, the Mayor of Colombo, and I'm pleased to inform the House that we have a delegation of young music leaders who are here taking part in a launch hosted by the Push, a national plan for young Australians in music, the realisation of a 10-year vision shaped by extensive consultation with young people as guests of the Minister for the Arts. We also have a group of young Greek-Australian leaders from across the country who are here in Canberra as part of the Greek-Australian Society's inaugural Young Leaders. On behalf of the House, welcome to Question Time, as today is also Greek Independence Day. Hero na pola. And I'm pleased to inform in the House today we have a delegation from the Sydney Swans, including coaches, management and current players Braden Campbell and Chloe Malloy, in a sea of red in the gallery. Welcome to Question Time. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Bradfield.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Australia led the world with cigarette plain packaging laws. We also led the world with the social media ban. But Australia is also the world leader in gambling harm, with the highest per capita gambling losses in the world. Plain packaging, the social media ban, Labor governments have shown us that they can get these hard but important things done. Prime Minister, gambling harm is killing people. When will you finally take real action and keep Australians safe?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Bradfield for her question, and I acknowledge as part of that question her acknowledgement, her welcome acknowledgement, that it is always Labor governments that do the big things, that do the big reforms, that change the country for the better. And that is what we do, Mr Speaker. That is what we do. And I thank the member for Bradfield for acknowledging that. Now, when it comes to gambling, we've done more than any other government to tackle online gambling harms. Can I move a point of order, Mr Speaker?
Order. I'd like the House to return to order. Prime Minister.
We're continuing to consult with stakeholders on this important issue because we know that there's more needs to be done. We're focused on addressing three key priorities when it comes to gambling. The first is minimising children's exposure to wagering advertising. The second is breaking the connection between wagering and sport. And the third is reducing the saturation and targeting of wagering advertising. And further reforms will build on the work that we've done up to this point, where we have launched the National Self-Exclusion Register BetStop. Just as one example, there have now been 58,000 total registrations. 36,000 of those are currently active. 38% of those people have chosen a lifetime ban, and 81% of the registrants said they have completely stopped betting on sports or racing events, and 15% said they had reduced it. 4 in 5 people who've registered for self-exclusion have since experienced a better overall quality of life, and 79% say that their mental health has got better as a direct result of that. We know that VetStop is working, and we know as well that there's more needs to be done. We need to also acknowledge something that hasn't been a part of a lot of the public discourse here, which is overwhelmingly problem gambling's greatest issue is poker machines, overwhelmingly. And second, in terms of the list, and a growing area is the issue of lotteries or Keno, various forms, including on devices, which give people far greater access to it. Now, one of the things that we also need to acknowledge, because this is an economic issue as well when it comes to our tax issues and towards offshore sites as well, is a major issue of a drain with money being suctioned overseas by these overseas companies. And it's something, one of the things that the government's examining is what we can do to deal with those overseas sites that are causing harm, that are completely unregulated because of the nature of them being overseas as well. So these issues aren't simple, but the government is working each and every day to make sure that we continue to make a difference, and I'll continue to report on further reforms.
Put to the honourable member for Ford.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its agenda to secure a future made in Australia and boosting our sovereign capability? What are the risks to these important priorities?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Ford for his question, a great Queenslander. And today, together with the Queensland Government of Premier David Crisafulli, we've secured the future of the Boyne aluminium smelter in central Queensland in Gladstone. This is a great example of—
Order. The member for Mallee. The Prime Minister is 20 seconds in. The member was heard in silence. The same respect is going to be shown to the Prime Minister. It's far too many interjections. Prime Minister in continuation.
This is an example of the Commonwealth working with a state government to deliver more manufacturing sovereignty for Australia and more energy for Australia as well. This is a joint investment that will transform the Queensland energy grid and deliver on our commitment to a future made in Australia. It will secure 1,000 jobs at the smelter, but importantly as well for Gladstone, over 2,000 jobs when you look at indirect jobs as well. This is about mobilising Australia's sovereign industrial capability and investing in energy resilience with new renewable energy generation and transmission across Queensland. And this is, I'm talking, Mr Speaker, about a joint announcement that's been worked out with myself, Premier Crisafulli and the respective ministers, and what we get is people over there showing their contempt for jobs and these issues and sovereignty. Through their interjections and through their response there, Mr Speaker. Well, we'll work with people of goodwill, regardless of what state, what the electorate is, or what political party is represented in that seat. This is about jobs for Gladstone. I would have thought a good thing that would be welcomed. I hope it's welcomed by the member for Gladstone, because it is indeed a great announcement. Now, the impact of the war on the Middle East shows us how important sovereignty is, how important it is that we make more things here. And it follows up from the work that we've done in Mount Isa, in the electorate of the member for Kennedy, in Whyalla, in the electorate of the member for Grey, making a difference, protecting jobs, making sure that we can make more things here that is so important. We're delivering a future made in Australia and securing sovereign capability. Those opposite who object to this reform and this investment, jointly 50-50 from the Queensland LNP and the federal Labor government, they show they only have two settings, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Talking Australia down and tearing each other down. And now
Order.
not satisfied with attacking us, now they're attacking the Crisafulli government as well.
The call to the honourable member for Moncrieff.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and I note his previous answer about the almost 500 service stations that have run dry. This morning, Queensland Premier David Crisafulli said, quote, "All we're after is a national plan to make sure that there's visibility of where fuel is flowing, because it's a crisis and it does need action." When will the minister take action to ensure fuel gets to where it's needed?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. This government has been taking action. We released, as I just outlined, 757 million litres for the minimum stock obligation on the condition that it flows. And some of the undertakings given to us under that will see it flow to Toowoomba, to Darling Downs, to those areas affected by flooding, to more fuel for local councils for the Atherton Tablelands and Mareeba, to more allocations to support Indigenous communities and get fuel up to Cape Law.
The Minister will pause. The member for Groom and the member for Fisher will not interject any more during this answer. Otherwise, they won't be here. Well, the member for Forrest can join them as well. So do not interject. There's just too much noise, and this is information that the member, I assume, wants to be read into the Hansard, that the member Moncrieff has had the opportunity to do, and the minister is responding directly. So everyone just calm down and just listen to the minister without this incessant interjecting for no reason at all. The minister can continue his answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've arranged for more allocations to support Indigenous communities and get fuel up to Cape York and the farming communities around Cairns and Townsville. We prioritise key refuelling sites for long-distance transport and extra bulk volume deliveries for families in Queensland. Interestingly, Mr Speaker, one of the towns that's been specifically identified for extra deliveries in Queensland is the town of Texas, Mr Speaker, in Queensland. We're sending fuel to Texas. Others had a plan to get fuel from Texas in a crisis, Mr Speaker. You know, if we'd had our fuel stock still in Texas, we couldn't have done this. We couldn't have made this delivery, because the fuel would still be on its way from America, Mr Speaker.
As the minister concluded his answer. Yeah. Order. Resume your seat. The member for Holt has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How can the Treasurer update the House on today's inflation data and the government's cost of living help? How does this compare to other approaches?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Holt's a wonderful local member and a really key part of our team, and she understands the cost of living pressures being felt in her community and around Australia. Today we got the new inflation numbers for February, and what those numbers showed is that inflation eased a little bit in February, still higher than we would like, but we also understand that the conflict in the Middle East will push that inflation higher and for longer. It is pleasing to see inflation came off a little bit in February, but we know that there are a lot of challenges in the global economy and in our own economy, and that's the government's focus. Headline inflation was flat in the month. It was down to 3.7 through the year. Underlying inflation 3.3% through the year. This reflects a mix of temporary factors like the end of the energy rebates and also some more persistent factors as well. Treasury estimates that around three-quarters of the increase in inflation since the middle of last year reflects temporary factors, Mr Speaker. Now, with Australians still under pressure despite this welcome easing of inflation in our economy in February, it's really more important than ever that we do the work that we're doing to get more fuel supply, to make sure the ACCC has the powers to police the suppliers and the retailers. We engage with industry to get fuel where it's needed. We engage with our international partners in ways described by the Energy Minister a moment ago to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to ensure that Australians who are under pressure at the petrol pump are getting supported by this government. It's also why it's so important we're managing the budget responsibly, a couple of surpluses, getting the Liberal debt down, banking upward revisions to revenue, a budget which is $233 billion stronger since we came to office, Mr Speaker. These numbers are also a reminder of why our cost of living help is so important. Cheaper medicines, more bulk billing, student debt relief and the like, but especially when it comes to the tax cuts, Mr Speaker, that will be rolling out in our economy in July and then the July after. Our 3 tax cuts together mean an average worker gets about an extra $50 a week to help with the cost of living. And this is especially important today, Mr Speaker, because today is the 1-year anniversary of the 2025 budget. And that means it's the 1-year anniversary of the member for Hume standing up after the budget and saying he opposes our tax cuts, Mr Speaker. And tomorrow is the anniversary of him voting against those tax cuts. And Friday is the anniversary of him saying that they would repeal these tax cuts. If you're looking for evidence that they haven't learned and they haven't changed, they took the member for Hume who opposes our tax cuts and made him the leader of the opposition.
With call to the honourable member for Mallee.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I refer to his statement earlier that there were almost 500 service stations which have run dry. This morning, Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen said the following, and I quote, "My very strong view that I took to National Cabinet last week is that any consideration of supply management should be coordinated at a national level. When will the Minister take action to ensure fuel gets to where it is needed?"
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Mallee for the question. And the contradiction in it, I think, is obvious from the nature of it, which is that the Victorian Premier said that at the meeting that was convened to nationally coordinate activity, to have a national fuel supply coordinator in Anthea Harris, and to have all of the states and territory governments to appoint someone as well so we could deal with the bureaucracy, and then energy ministers were convened the day after on Friday to coordinate that approach with the energy ministers. I intend convening again the National Cabinet meeting. Will meet next week to further coordinate the activity that we are taking, and indeed coordinating that activity is important that we have national consistency.
Order. Members on my left. Can't hear a word that anyone's saying just because of the constant chatter. There's not even interjections anymore, it's just noise. Honestly. Before we move to the member for Moreton, we have some very special visitors that have just arrived onto the floor of the Parliament. I'm pleased to inform the House that joining us today on the floor is a parliamentary delegation from the Parliament of Singapore, led by my friend the Speaker, Mr Siya Kehan Penga. A very warm welcome to you, Speaker, and your delegation. We give the call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government backing truck drivers, and what has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Moreton for her question and for her standing up for workers, for standing up for Australian truck drivers in Queensland but right across Australia. Now, this Labor government is backing the trucking industry and truck drivers who are delivering essential goods across Australia, and they deserve to make a decent living. In recognition of this, the government has given the Fair Work Commission the ability to issue contract chain orders and set fair minimum standards across the road transport supply chain, ensuring that truckies in our country get a fair go. Under the current legislation, the Fair Work Commission must consult when setting contract chain orders for a minimum of 6 months. This government recognises, with the ongoing war in the Middle East resulting in volatile fuel prices, the Commission needs the power to respond more quickly to contract change order applications to ensure that trucking companies and owner-operators are not left to absorb the costs on their own. In good news for the industry, this government has taken swift and decisive action to do exactly this. Yesterday, we announced that we'll be introducing an amendment to the Fair Work Act to establish an urgent pathway for truckies to argue for their fair share at the Commission. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about the response to our announcement and our action has been. Well, there has been broad support right across the transport industry for our action. The President of the National Road Freighters Association, Glyn Castanelli, said the government's announcement couldn't come soon enough and noted, "We've got to protect truckies, and that is what this will do." The Australian Truckie Association also strongly supported our action, saying the ATA stands today with the government, with the union, with our employers and with our small operators in support of this announcement. And further, the ATA committed we will do anything to speed this amendment through the parliament, and we thank them for their assistance. The Transport Workers Union said of the importance of this legislation that the government is taking decisive action. And I'm pleased to say that we even had positive comments in the Courier Mail editorial today which said that these changes are good news for truckies. This Labor government is standing up for our truckies and our road transport industry, ensuring it's reliable and viable, resilient into the future.
Call to the honourable member for Monash.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and I refer to the fact that around 500 service stations have now run dry. This morning, Premier Chris Minns said, and I quote, there was a willingness from the states to say to the Commonwealth, look, we need to make sure that if there's going to be demand management measures that are put in place, they need to be done on a national level. When will the minister take action to ensure fuel gets to where it's needed?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question, and I thank her for accurately quoting the Premier of New South Wales, which is a big step forward on yesterday, Mr Speaker, a big step forward after the member for Lindsay completely misquoted and misrepresented the Premier of New South Wales. Just dropped the word "if," which does rather a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, Mr Speaker, rather a lot of heavy lifting.
Order. The minister will pause. The member for Lindsay is entitled to take a point of order.
It's on relevance. This isn't the first time that the minister has done this personally towards me, and it is not about the opposition.
No. Resume. No. I'll take action on this. No. I warned everyone before. Just, Minister, resume your seat. No, I was crystal clear, and I said to everyone, this is how things will go. You simply can't attach the attend dispatch box to say you don't like what the minister is saying. We would be here all day if that happened. You didn't. Well, that would be the case if everyone could say, I object to whatever someone's saying. So you will leave the chamber under 94A for abuse of standing orders. You didn't state the point of order. Well, to simply say that the minister has done this numerous times is an abuse of the standing orders. Simply state the point of order on relevance, as the manager does, and then we will deal with it. Not to say anything else. We're simply not going to have people taking points of order because you don't like what the minister is saying. We cannot have that. No speaker has tolerated that, and I won't either. The minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the honourable member referred to the statements of the Premier about the willingness to act in coordination, which is exactly what this Prime Minister is doing by convening a national cabinet with said premiers, Mr Speaker, and me convening energy ministers with said energy ministers, Mr Speaker. That's what coordination means, coordinating the action we have taken and coordinating further action together. That is exactly what we are doing. It is exactly what we have done, and I'll say again, Mr Speaker, if those opposite want to engage in a little bit of patriotism for a change instead of partisanship, they can make just one constructive suggestion for the first time.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Albanese Labor government concluded a range of important agreements with the European Union. At a time of global uncertainty, why do these agreements matter, and what has been the response?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the fantastic member for Dunkley for her question, and thank her as well for her ongoing advocacy on behalf of the people of Frankston and the region that she's so proud to represent, where international trade can make a difference in local communities. That's the point here, because it's about strengthening our economy and strengthening jobs. And yesterday we finalised 3 agreements with the European Union. One that boosts Australian research and development through connecting us up with Horizon there in Europe. One that boosts our defence and security cooperation with Europe, that's so important. And after 8 long years of negotiation, this government secured an Australia-EU free trade agreement. This opens up access to 27 European markets for our Australian products and makes European goods cheaper for Australians here at home. It's a win as well for 450 million Europeans who get more access to Australian products, the best in the world. And it's a win for our nation, for business, for primary producers and for consumers. It's a win for everyone who backs Australia and who wants to see more trade and more Australian industry. And of course, I take the interjections from those opposite. The Nats claim to speak for the bush, but they say that massive increases in exports of red meat is somehow a bad thing. This agreement provides for 8 times our access for our beef. 8 times. 8 times. Is that better or worse? Instead of 4,000 tonnes, 35,000 tonnes, making an enormous difference. Plus, as well, 5 times the increase in our access for sheep meat.
On my left,
now,
for Groom
those opposite used to say that they supported free trade. They used to do that. But they've just gone backwards, Mr Speaker. They're so spooked by the one guy up, who isn't even bothered to turn up today, up the corner, that they're adopting their policies and just trying to be one nation light when it comes to trade and trade issues. There he is. Mr Speaker, he doesn't even have to be in the room for that tail to wag the dog, Mr Speaker. Doesn't even have to be in the room. Well, we back Australian trade, we back Australian producers and we back Australian consumers. The coalition will just continue to talk Australia down.
Before I call the honourable member for Kennedy, I'm also pleased to advise that the council from Doomadgee and the CEO Troy Fraser is here from the members' electorate today. Give the call to the honourable member for Kennedy.
Treasurer, 30% of Australia's fuel can be supplied from existing Indigenous reserves, even without tapping oil shales. Why does government refuse to ban exports, which earn a measly $8,000 million, whilst importing fuel costing us $62,000 million? Australia, one of the big four in grain and sugar production, both the feedstock of ethanol. Why no action? Ethanol can right now supply 3% of Australia's demand. Additionally, 4 of the recently closed refineries can easily be recommissioned. Why, on these 3 obvious initiatives, has the government done nothing?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Kennedy for his question. The government's working very hard to make sure that there is enough fuel reaching regional and other communities in our country, and a big part of that is making sure that we have the refining capacity that we need. I pay tribute to the work of the Energy Minister, who just on Friday in my neck of the woods was making it easier for our local refineries to access the support that they need. The two remaining refineries, after the Leader of the Opposition waved another 4 of them goodbye when he was the Energy Minister, Mr Speaker. And so locally produced fuel is a big part of the government's efforts to deal with the consequences of what we're seeing out of the Middle East, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, we also recognise how important ethanol is to our domestic fuel supply. And more than recognising that, we're investing in it. Once again, at the Lytton refinery, the Energy Minister and I announced $1.1 billion for our Cleaner Fuels program, which is to invest in low-carbon liquid fuel production in Australia, consistent with the kinds of goals that the member for Kennedy has, and that's on top of the $250 million in innovation funding under the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund. He's right that we don't have a mandate, but the relevant departments and authorities have been working to see whether we could implement one in the future, making sure that we factor in things like safety and quality. And again, that's all about supporting our local fuels industry. We know at times like this, when there's an extraordinary amount of global economic uncertainty, the main driver of that is this oil shock coming out of the war in the Middle East. We're working on a whole range of fronts to address those challenges, and a big part of that, the efforts that we're all putting into our domestic industry.
The call to the honourable member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government making it easier for Australians to see a GP for free? Why is this important after a decade of cuts and neglect?
The call to the Minister for Health and Ageing, the Minister for Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Speaker. My friend and colleague, the member for Spence, is a terrific representative of Adelaide's northern suburbs. A lot of people do it tough in Adelaide's north, but it is an amazing community. It gave us Holden cars and Jimmy Barnes and so much else. Those opposite managed to shut down Holden's, but not even that terrible government could shut down Barnsley, for which we're all very thankful, Mr Speaker. But he's also been a relentless advocate for a stronger Medicare in Adelaide's north. The urgent care clinic in Elizabeth has seen almost 30,000 people already, all bulk billed, taking pressure off the terrific Lyle McEwen Hospital. And last month we opened a new Headspace service in Gawler, Mr Speaker, as well as a new Gidget Perinatal Mental Health Centre in Elizabeth as well. Both opened just last month, Mr Speaker. And soon that long-standing Headspace in Edinburgh's north that's been supporting young people in the members' community for almost 2 decades is going to be upgraded to a Headspace Plus with more staff and more free services for young people, Mr Speaker. But for a community like Adelaide's north, bulk billing is especially important. The idea that people there can go to the doctor whenever they feel they need to, rather than just when they feel they can afford to. And when we came to government 4 years ago, Mr Speaker, bulk billing was in freefall because of a decade of cuts to Medicare, particularly the Medicare rebate freeze. And after we tripled the bulk billing incentive, bulk billing for pensioners and concession card holders since 2023 started to turn around. But our decision to extend bulk billing payments for the first time ever to every single Australian last year is the thing that's really making a big difference. Since the 1st of November, Mr Speaker, just 5 months ago, the number of general practices in Spence, bulk billing all of their patients all of the time, has tripled. It's tripled, Mr Speaker. So today, 2 out of every 3 general practices are 100% bulk billing practices in the electorate of Spence. Indeed, before the 1st of November, Mr Speaker, only around 2,000 general practices in Australia, out of more than 7,000, were 100% bulk billing. Now, we expected to get that number up from 2,000 to 3,600 by 2028 on our way to a 90% bulk billing figure in 2030 that the Prime Minister committed to. Well, I'm pleased to report, Mr Speaker, we have already achieved our 2028 target in March 2026. Today, there are 3,621 general practices bulk billing all of their patients, and that number is increasing every single week, Mr Speaker.
Give a call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. When will the Prime Minister take action to ensure that fuel gets to the almost 500 service stations that have run dry?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. And we have established the Fuel Supply Task Force. We've convened the National Cabinet. We're engaging with state and territory governments who are responsible, of course, for distribution issues, but we're making sure that it's coordinated in a way. And I note the media release from, for example, the New South Wales Premier today and the actions that the New South Wales Government are taking as well. Right across the country, we're engaging. I've been having constructive discussions with Premier Crisafulli as well. It can't be.
Order. The Prime Minister's concluded his answer. Yep. No, we'll move to the next question. Order. No, we're not having commentary, and we're not having just people approach the dispatch box. Order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Education. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering better outcomes for students through the Better and Fairer Schools agreements after a decade of decline in outcomes?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank my friend, the ridiculously talented member for Reid? Like that one? Mr Speaker, I told the House a couple of weeks ago that the number of kids finishing high school is going back up. And that's good news because for the last decade it's been going down, from about 85% down to 79%, and now that's turning around. It's not the only example of where things are turning around. School attendance is another example. Since 2014, the number of kids turning up to school has been going down every year, year after year after year, and now that's going back up as well. And it's the same story with school teachers, the number of people starting a degree at university to become a school teacher. Over the last decade, the number of people signing up to become a school teacher has plummeted, and that's now turning around as well. Over the course of the last 3 years, that's jumped 20%, and indicative numbers this year indicate it's jumped by about another 6.3%. And none of this happens by accident. It happens because of the action that this government is taking and because of the action that state and territory governments are taking. And, Mr Speaker, we've got some more good news, this time on reading, on the reading of our littlest Australians. Now, I've told MPs before that the reading wars are over, that we know what works, and it's phonics that works. And the results that we got out of New South Wales last week are proof of that. For the last few years, they've been teaching kids to read with phonics, and they've been doing something called a phonics check. Now, 3 years ago, 1 in 2 children in New South Wales, according to the phonics check, were on track with their reading. Last year, that jumped to 2/3 in just 3 years, from 1 in 2 to 2/3 in 3 years. And at 5 Dock Primary School, in the member for Reid's electorate, it's even more incredible. 3 years ago, it was 1 in 2. It was 50% of kids were on track with their reading. Last year, it was 90%. Now, I think that's about the most incredible news that I have heard in my time as Education Minister. The impact of that is potentially massive, because if you get the basics right when you're little, then you can build on it. And we need to build on that too. And that's why this year, For the first time ever, every state and every territory will roll out the phonics check in Year 1. And we're going to do the same thing with maths. This year, most states will roll out or pilot a maths check, a numeracy check as well. This is all part of the agreements that we've signed with every state and territory to fix the funding of our public schools that we did a year ago this week, the biggest investment in our public schools by an Australian government ever, and it's not a blank cheque. It's tied to important reforms just like this.
Give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Industry and Innovation. Minister, the Strategic Examination of Research and Development report released last week was called Ambitious Australia. Much of that report, including its key recommendation to establish a National Innovation Council, is spookily similar to the Rudd government's Venturous Australia report from 2008. Given that this recommendation for a National Innovation Council is almost two decades old, will the government commit to actually acting on it?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry. Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and to the member for Kooyong. I'm answering the question in the absence of Minister Conroy. I think, as I indicated the other day, the government takes the recommendations of the strategic review very seriously. In fact, I met with Robin Denham and other members of the panel, Ian Chubb and others, this morning, as it turns out, to talk about the recommendations, and the PM similarly. And that's because we do understand the central role of research and development and innovation in the productivity challenge that we have. Productivity came up last year, grew a bit faster than the 20-year average, but isn't growing fast enough to lift living standards into the future. And so we're working through the 20 recommendations. Now, when it comes to the Council that the honourable member refers to, obviously Minister Ayres in the other place, working with a number of colleagues, is working out the best way forward there. We know that the honourable member has a particular interest in medical research, as does the member for Melbourne, who has been engaging with us in her characteristically diligent and dedicated way, representing the wonderful researchers in the community of Melbourne. And so we'll continue to work with the member for Melbourne, with any members in this place with an interest in making sure we make the most out of research and development and innovation, because we understand the fundamental and central role it will continue to play in our economy as we try and meet these economic objectives of a much more productive economy with higher living standards into the future.
Give the call to the honourable member for Braddon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry. I didn't quite get there, so my question is to the Minister for Veteran Affairs and Defence Personnel. How is the Albanese government delivering support for veterans to access free advocacy services, and why is this so important?
Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for Braddon for her question. I've had the great opportunity of visiting many veteran services in her electorate with her, including the Burnie Hub, which we were able to open during the last term of the Albanese government. And of course, the Albanese government from day one has been focused on delivery for our veteran community. Our significant investments in the Department of Veterans Affairs have improved claim processing. We are now determining more claims than ever, and we're improving support reaching our veterans and the families of veterans. But we've also seen an increase in unscrupulous commercial veteran advocates taking advantage of our veterans. We heard in a recent Senate inquiry the urgent need to increase the capacity and the capability of free-to-the-veteran advocacy services, because in some cases we saw commercial advocates had been charging commissions as high as 29% of a veteran's statutory compensation payment, or charging contract break fees in excess of $27,000. And of course that means we as a government are taking action. We are investing more than $203 million to improve DVA's integrity measures and to expand the support for free-to-use advocacy services for veterans and the families of veterans. This will ensure that veterans and their families receive safe, high-quality services that taxpayer dollars are going towards the support of veteran wellbeing rather than looking after those that are trying to take advantage of our veterans. We've doubled the funding for the Building Excellence and Support Training Grant Program, the BEST grants. These support ex-service organisations in providing free-to-use advocacy services for our veterans. We're also providing greater funding security for those ex-service organisations so that they can employ and provide training to their advocates that are free to use for a veteran, to support them by making these grants instead of just for 1 year but for 3 years. These changes address Recommendation 99 of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. This will mean that veterans can better access free-to-use advocates to assist them with making their claims with DVA. This is all part of how the Albanese government is committed to delivering the care, services and supports that our veteran community not only needs, but it deserves. And it stands in stark contrast to the division that we see from the Liberals and the Nationals opposite.
With a call to the member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. In my electorate of Page, community transport providers are warning that without urgent fuel cost support, they will have to reduce services to more than 2,000 vulnerable people. What is the Minister's plan to ensure recent rising fuel costs do not result in the loss of these essential services?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Seniors.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. I acknowledge that there are providers all across Australia and communities, and all of our communities, who are providing these very important services to older people. Transport is obviously a critical part of the public service that's provided under the Commonwealth Home Support Program. I assume it's that program that the services that the member is referring to pertain to. As the Minister for Climate Change and Energy has confirmed, Australia is fuel secure. Petrol companies have advised us that fuel stocks continue to arrive on time and in the quantities expected. Now, we continue to closely monitor the impact of prices on aged care providers. And of course, providers can seek support through existing aged care business and viability supports offered by my department, and we will stand ready to provide those supports through the Market Adjustment Program, through dedicated First Nations support programs, or our business and workforce advisory services. We're not experiencing a fuel shortage. What we're seeing is localised disruption caused by significant spikes in demand.
Has the Minister concluded his answer? Has the Minister concluded his answer? No. The Manager on a point of order.
Yeah, thanks, Speaker, and it goes to relevance. It's regarding the cost of fuel, and 2,000 services will be cancelled unless you can deal with the cost. So if you could come to the cost, please.
The question was, what is the plan to ensure that services won't be reduced? Order. Just dealing with the point of order which the Manager was entitled to do. He was asked, as I understand, specifically, what is the Minister's plan to ensure that services won't be reduced in relation to the issue. So he is being directly relevant to the point that he was asked about, and he's referring to the services. So just making sure that he's being directly relevant, the Minister may continue.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the member couldn't hear. I'll repeat myself. We stand ready to support aged care businesses through our viability supports offered by the department. We've got a market adjustment program. We've got dedicated First Nations support programs. We've got our business and workforce advisory services. We'll continue to support these wonderful providers who look after older people across our communities every single day. We've had no interruption to services, but we'll continue to monitor and support them as needed.
Call to the Honourable. When the House comes to order, member for Durack. We'll hear from the Honourable Member for Bonner.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Cities. How is the Albanese Labor government tackling the housing challenges facing the country? What other approaches are there?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And what a pleasure to get this question from the wonderful member for Bonner. She is so passionate about housing, Speaker, and particularly about making sure that we have proper supports in place for women and children fleeing family violence. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with her in the time that she's been in the parliament. Speaker, our national housing challenge is affecting the lives of many people around our country. Australians are doing everything right, Speaker. They're saving up, they're planning for the future, they're thinking in advance, and yet they still reach a point, often much later in their life than we would like, where they're not able to get that foothold in the housing market that they deserve. Now, Speaker, it is for those families that our government has built the boldest and most ambitious agenda a Commonwealth government has had on housing since the post-war period. We have got a long way to go on this, Speaker, but by God are we making progress. 570,000 homes built since we came to office, 6,000 social and affordable homes completed, 24,000 in planning or construction today. Every single renter in our country has improved rental standards because of the leadership of our Prime Minister. We've got hundreds of thousands of Australians out of renting and into their first home. And, Speaker, we're seeing approvals turn a corner, up 7% on year. Now, Speaker, I'm asked about alternative approaches, and opposite us sit three right-wing parties, the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation. Now, they say that they have differences, Speaker, but I can tell you what, when it comes to housing, they look all the same to me. They say that they care.
All right.
They say they care about supply.
We're not just having a free-for-all no matter what time the question is. The member for Page is warned, won't say one more word for the remainder of this answer, or he won't be here to hear the remainder of the answer. The minister deserves the courtesy of being heard in silence.
Thank you so much, Speaker. They say, these three parties, that they care. They say they care about supply. They say they care about supporting first home buyers. But when it actually comes time to act, what do, Speaker? They say no. They say no to 30,000 social and affordable homes under the Housing Australia Future Fund. They say no to unlocking 80,000 homes through our build-to-rent changes. They say no to helping more Australians get pathways into home ownership. So let's be clear about what the approach of the right-wing parties would do for housing in this country, Speaker. Build fewer homes, make housing more expensive and make home ownership further away for the people of our great country.
Order.
Now, Speaker, they love to give us all a bit of lip in the chamber, but I want to remind them that politics is not about all the politicking that you come in here to do. It's not about all the leadership ructions that you get up to. It's not about One Nation laying landmines. It's about doing the gritty hard work of making a difference. And there's only one political party in this parliament that's doing that on housing, and that is the Australian Labor Party.
Give a call to the honourable member for Kennedy.
Minister for Health, recent data shows 72 deaths in the Cape Straits and Gulf in 4 years attributable to diabetes. Diabetes, inter alia, results from poor nutrition. Post-Country Party, subsequent Labor and Liberal governments abolished the missionary market gardens, banned the islanders' ubiquitous backyard fruit and vegetable gardens, and in an initiative the Nazis would be proud of, the government took away islanders' staple diet, seafood. Will you act immediately to stop what some people describe even tantamount to genocide?
Just remind the member for Kennedy to be careful with his language and how he describes things and situations. The Minister for Health, the Minister for the NDIS and Disability has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. While I strongly reject the characterisation that the member just made of a number of decisions, I do also recognise and have for some years his deep interest in this area, his involvement going back to his time as Minister for Aboriginal Affairs in the Bjelke-Petersen government, and the role that market gardens, the Mission Market Gardens program, played back then. And I've heard the member speak passionately about this question many times. I understand representatives of the community are here in Parliament this week and will be meeting with Minister McCarthy tomorrow to talk more about issues of food security. The member raises what is probably the most pressing public health challenge the whole country has, which is the rise of diabetes type 2, but we know that it is a particular challenge for First Nations communities. We know that prevalence is high, morbidity and mortality are higher for First Nations Australians. We know that treatment of advanced diabetes takes too many First Nations Australians off-country for dialysis treatment, which is why we're seeking to build renal services in remote communities so people can receive that dialysis on country. But really, the member raises the more important questions about how we prevent people going into diabetes in the first place. We have been working very hard, through Minister McCarthy in particular, to improve food security in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And that program, the Low-Cost Essentials Subsidy Scheme, is already subsidising the cost of dozens of essential items in grocery stores in remote communities, so that First Nations Australians in those communities are paying the same price that Australians in metropolitan Australia pay, saving up to 50%, with prices now comparable to city supermarkets in about 113 stores to date, and we're working to improve that. But I know that's not a full answer to the member's question. I say this, that the Minister for Indigenous Australians, the Minister for Social Services, I and other members of the government are committed to working together to address what is a very serious public health challenge, but a deep shame and stain on First Nations communities. The lack of access to high-quality, affordable food is something we should always strive to improve. I look forward to the meeting that the Minister for Indigenous Australians is having with community members, and probably the member himself over the coming day or two, and I'll certainly be happy to do anything I can to contribute to this effort.
The call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. What is the Albanese government doing to secure our fuel supply and support Australians during this fuel spike, and what other approaches are there?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank the member for Hasluck for her question and her interest, obviously, in the transport industry in particular. But since the commencement of the Middle East conflict, we have been working to ensure that Australians have access to the fuel that they need. I'm in regular contact with transport representatives working on practical measures to address the consequences of rising international fuel prices. Tomorrow I will convene a third such meeting of transport and the fuel industry together. Across government and industry, we are working on a coordinated approach, and already we have released 20% of the minimum stockholding obligation for petrol and diesel, particularly directed to regional communities, amended fuel standards for petrol and now announced yesterday diesel to allow more supply into the market. We've announced legislation to amend the Fair Work Act so transport operators can renegotiate the costs of fuel in their contracts now, not in 6 months' time. Introduced legislation to strengthen the ACCC's hand-doubling penalties for companies found guilty of unfairly raising their fuel prices. And we continue to monitor airlines and airfares closely. We're working with our regional partners like Singapore and Korea to shore up supply, strengthening energy security and support the flow of essential goods. And in the longer term, we are, of course, building a sustainable fuels industry here in Australia through our $1.1 billion Cleaner Fuels program. Our government is continuing to work around the clock to respond to these fuel price spikes and the issues around supply. But when you look at those opposite, what do we see? We see absolute chaos and no ideas at all. In the Senate yesterday, the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure announced that the coalition would be supporting a motion for the Commonwealth to pay states and territories for their public transport fares. All right? That's up to them to say they're going to do that. But when it actually came down to the vote itself, all of the Liberal members fled the chamber. It was frankly like watching a game of follow the leader. The only problem was they couldn't decide which leader. There are now more people with leader in their title in the coalition than they have women sitting on the front bench in the House. Imagine them each morning, leader, 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 hello. while we're getting on with the job of dealing with an international global crisis, those opposite simply are an absolute joke.
Call to the Prime Minister.
On that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.